Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Earnshaw, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm one of the co-leaders of the LGBTQ ministry at All Saints Pasadena. What you're about to see is a discussion event held jointly by the LGBTQ ministry and the Racial Justice Ministry at All Saints on the topic of addressing violence against Black transgender women. Now, we began our discussion event actually by watching a panel discussion held by the Commonwealth Club of California last year with panelists Tony Newman and Monica Roberts. Tony Newman is an author, an advocate for sex workers' rights, and former executive director of the St. James Infirmary in San Francisco. Monica Roberts was an award-winning blogger and journalist, particularly noted for coverage of transgender homicides, and sadly passed away earlier this year. Both women are powerful voices in Black trans activism, and we learned a lot from their discussion, and that formed the basis of the conversation that we had afterwards. So in order to get the full context behind the discussion you're about to see, I really recommend following the link, which will be given below, just to watch the first half of that video in which Tony and Monica discuss their own perspective on violence against Black transgender women. And then you can watch the rest of this video.
So we're so happy to have Hannah and Thomas here to help us discuss this important topic.
Yeah, thank you. I guess we want to just start out by asking people what you heard. What did you hear? What stood out to you? What took you by surprise? Just sort of first impressions to start off with.
I wanted to celebrate someone who's gonna have that.
One of the panel's sense of humor in describing Betsy DeVos. She said Cruella DeVos, and the evil evangelicals. I forgot how she, but that I love that sense of humor, and I'm taking that away. I also appreciated how a way to fight was to stand up when you hear a comment, to stand up and to state hate, and that was reassuring. So I appreciate those just to begin with. Thank you.
I was gonna say something. One thing that opened my eyes the first time I watched that video was, here I've been a member of the LGBTQ community for, well, since I was born, but active in different organizations. And in recent years, we've been including trans. So that's been part, it used to just be gay and lesbian, then it was lesbian and gay and bi, and now we've been including like we're separate, using the word trans as part of the organization. So I never went really much beyond that. So in listening to this film, it really opened my eyes that, well, it's not just a word, and it's not just knowing the person here or there. There's things that we really need to do that I don't think we're doing, that I know I'm not doing. And so the rest of the film was just loaded with some great ideas on what to do to support trans people. I was just struck that I felt like I'm not supporting trans. I have not ever supported trans people other than saying LGBTQ, just using the T there and saying it. So that was a real eye opener for me. That's it.
Dominique?
Yeah, I was struck by, because I knew that it would be about sort of violence against trans women and particularly Black trans women. But at the very end, when they talked about how the trans community is not just tragic, that there's joy, there are people that are experiencing successes. And I think that's important. I think, we as a Black community, that's one thing that we're always talking about as well, is, yes, there's a lot of tragedy, but there's also so much triumph, and we are not this tragic population of people. And so I thought that was really, that surprised me as well. But it was nice to like, oh yeah, let's remember that, and how do we embrace that?
I was moved by some of the parallels that the trans community faces in terms of most of the Black trans death are caused by other Black people. They're in relationship, and that goes back to the whole sexuality issue in the Black community that Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, in her book Sexuality in the Black Church, touched on those phases. I mean, if Black women have always been demonized and evil and caught derogatory words, and um, even our vice president elect, she was called a B and a this and a that. I mean, they don't know this person is a person in the community, and the fact that it often occurs in relationship is the whole issue of sexuality, particularly in the Black community, where to aspire from the patriarchal standpoint to aspire to be that, and then you have a relationship with something that's not viewed as within the norms of sexuality within the majority community, then it's part of a self-hate process. So it's the trans community needs protection, but there also needs to be more education in dealing with the Black sexuality. And I know we just saw recently a kind of a documentary about Teddy Pendergrass and how he became a paraplegic. And there was this issue of whether or not um, the lady that he brought home, did he know she was trans? Did that have something to do with him having the car accident? So anyway, that were some of the points that it drove home for me.
Yeah, I gotta say, one of the things that really struck me as well was the fact that so many of these incidents are to do with intimate partner violence. I think sometimes I hear about violence and murders, and my mind goes to, oh, a dark alley with a stranger and a knife and whatever. But it's not. It's not really how it happens. It's a lot more kind of close to home. It's a lot more hidden sometimes, and that's quite difficult to deal with.
I was struck by the part early on when Tony was talking about being killed just because of who you are, how we wouldn't put up with that for other group. And I just guess that struck me as just terribly sad to think of like people killing people like me just because of who I am. I mean, I don't mean like me, I'm not a trans person, but as Tony was speaking, I felt bad for her. Yeah, I thought that was a powerful part for me.
Yeah, I was struck by the absence of discussion from Tony and Monique about their own, Monica, excuse me, about their own families. Because I know that one of the things in my own journey, we have dynamics in our families that are there, but sometimes we just ignore, and we have a tendency to reject someone that is different and doesn't fit into the norm. And that may be, I don't really know how to really describe it, but I know that that is the beginning of that family structure. And I've heard from people that are really close that basically they have to disconnect from their family because it is not the place for them to be who they are, right? And so, um, and I don't know about that. I don't know where that really starts from. You know what I mean? From the standpoint of an education, sort of, Dylan. I don't know how you can do that when you have someone that is akin, that is your blood, that is your whatever. You know what I mean? That it can be that, but there's a tremendous amount of fear that exists, and I know that some of that exists and it is in the hands of patriarchy. You know, fathers, the way they look at their children, and that's really difficult. But I know that's the discussion I think needs to a wider discussion that sh- yeah, I think should happen. Yeah.
So one of the things that was mentioned, and it's, and I come from, being a queer person of color myself, is that there is still the reality that there's still a lack of support or even acknowledgement within the community. And we're seeing that, unfortunately, more and more, even when we have, for instance, corporate like Pride Month, and we see Targets and Nordstrom's putting up the rainbow flags, and we see our churches doing our, Pride events, and where it might sound and give the impression that our community is fine and that we've included everybody, we approve everyone, and we can move forward. And I think what we're seeing, especially in a year like this, that you can corporatize all of these inclusive events, and there's going to show the lack that it provides and what it shows. And one of the things that, for me as a queer person and just in my own journey, I think about sometimes I think what tends to happen in the community is there there is this fear to go beyond this like identity that just remains within you, and thinking that it can only just be within, that's just enough for me and I don't need to do anything more. And I think partially I think it's because those who belong to the LGBTQ community are still even still trying to figure out what that even means in a society when it's constantly being picked on and constantly seen as marginalized. Though it can be said that most cis white lesbian and gays do have the upper hand in it, but that is only to indicate how the system is operating within that community. And I think what we're starting to see, and I think, in a time like 2020, but just, as mentioned, just in the past couple of years, happening in legislation, happening in boardrooms, that there is a shift that's happening. And it is starting to intimidate the upper hand, folks who thought that they had it, knowing that there might be a power that is weakening. And I think that what really needs to be mentioned is that maybe it's not that there's a power that's weakening, there's something actually becoming more fully awakened within the community. And, and the idea of an ally and what it means to be that ally, it does just, it does take that standing up. And I think like when, for instance, here as a faith community, in particular with, us belonging to, let's say, the Episcopal branch, we can say that there have been great strides for the queer community, but in reality, when you have, still churches and institutions within the Episcopal Church just not wanting to give any recognition to trans or non-binary people, we you know, we can't just applaud that we have the inclusiveness, that there's a rainbow flag outside of a church building. It doesn't fall from that. So I think, you know, what's important when we hear these types of forms, that we're not there yet. And that has to be the encouragement, not the letdown, because there is still joy in that. The joy is that the work is being pushed down the road further and further, and we're going to then run up to it and say, wait, we're going to do even more for this. And I think it's going to take it does take allies. It does take that courage, that boldness to say, I'm standing up. And I remember hearing once, when you go into a boardroom, when you go into a business meeting and you look around, and if you don't see someone who's there, question it. Why aren't they there? Why is that person not there? It can be seen like, why is, where is that representation if it's not there in the room? And I think that that's part of the ally call as well, to be observers of that. When you don't see a trans person or non-binary person in the room, ask it, why? Why is that? And I think, as it was mentioned, it's just because I think often there are folks who want to see how much they can get away with transphobia. And I think that, that takes that bold, that courageous justice on an ally to rise that up and ask the question, then why is it that they're not in the room? And I think that's again, an important piece to that.
That was wonderful, Thomas. I think one of the things that Tony brought up, Tony Newman brought up, was that they just got funded $1 million or so for their programs. And I think that the programs are a way to connect the community, rather than say, well, I donated to the Trevor Project, all right, but that's sort of like quiet money and you send it away and I'm an ally. But just like we did this morning with the foster care program and with Thistle Farms, if we had some local trans organizations come in on the forum and just say, we are here in your community, and it's a direct appeal that that shows that as a church, this is something that we care about. And I think that just looking at the film and the discussion, it does like, if somebody, just like those homeless people that we're trying to get them houses and whatnot because they're part of the community, so are trans, they're us. I mean, and then I think that for me, that's a call to action, is just seeking out, and there are the organizations are here, and I think that's as allies, that's what we need to do.
I have a question for Thomas, and actually anyone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community. I know that a lot of times we as marginalized communities, it's almost like we play the oppression Olympics, and it's like my struggle's harder, and so you can't even see the other person because you're so focused on your struggle. And so I wonder, Dave Chappelle got into a lot of trouble. He did a trans joke. Actually, it was a joke about the LGBTQ community that was really inappropriate. But one of the points that he made was almost as though there's like a food chain, and at the top of that is white gay men, and then everybody else falls underneath. And which I thought was actually, I was like, I wonder if that's still, because I remember just growing up and being a part of my gay friends going to West Hollywood, I could feel the racism. My Black gay men friends would talk to me about how they didn't always feel comfortable in those very white male spaces, even though they're all considered LGBTQ. And so I wonder if that's something like, do you see that playing out in terms of trans members of the LGBTQ community, that it's almost as though, other groups are not allowing space and allowing room? Or, what do you think about that?
It's to speak on the West Hollywood end of things, definitely, yeah, let's start there. Yeah, there's definitely a dominance that that what at least what my friends have told me, especially my trans friends, that there is that sense in West Hollywood that at the bars and and all of that, the fun nightclubs, that there is still this sense of like, I'm not sure if I can go and just remain 100% safe, and not safe, it's safe from not necessarily from like violence, though that's going to be up there, but just from the sake of just being, you know, kind of looked at, and then then you hear the side joke happening, which I hear, I mean, prior to COVID, but that's just what continues to happen, are the side jokes, the side, that's just the remarks that happen. And again, I think that really comes from a place of saying like there's this lack of saying that this is also part of an identity that is marginalized with under our umbrella. And I think where that does come from is how where society gives more permission. And I think there's just been more permission, for instance, for gay cis males to mainly, even if they're white, to kind of have a little bit more dominance in a particular social gathering or group, and then what's interesting about that too, I'm obviously talking all pre-COVID stuff, but there are even at nightclubs and bars like certain designated nights for certain designated people, right? So even that still occurs for that probably reason, because there's still not this idea of like, on a typical Friday night, everybody's gathering together with all stripes and colors just because that's what we do. No, that's not what we do. I don't think it has happened. And I think that what's going to be curious, post-COVID, stuff, how the community comes back into our social gatherings, our social clubs. I don't know. I'm curious about that too. But to kind of bring back to that, I think that's part, one of the main reasons why it's who society gives dominance to, and that's just been a constant reality when it comes to that. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, and first of all, a response that, having been at All Saints for a long time and seen, at least feeling welcomed myself as a gay person, I have stood at the welcome table and people have approached me and said, is it true? Are you really welcome here? Are you really fully included here? So, and I don't know, other than just coming and staying for a while, if that's all it takes to understand that it's true. I have met 4 transgender people at All Saints, and they're all white, and they are involved in a number of ways in the church, but also are well-educated people who have careers, and they're doing things pretty well. But I don't know if that's true or not. When in the panel they talked about the trials of someone who had been murdered, and that the attorney was able to bring up the trans panic offense. I mean, what is that offense? What is, I mean, I get hatred and fear, but is it something very specific?
So the trans panic defense is basically it's a justification for the murder of trans people, which basically goes that if someone partners up with a trans person and like doesn't realize that they're trans, and the trans person reveals to them, oh, by the way, I'm transgender, then they are so shocked by this revelation that they panicked and killed the trans person, and this is used as a justification for murder, as an excuse, as a, oh, they couldn't help it, they were so disturbed by this horrifying revelation that they just had to kill someone who was right in front of them. And like it's awful. It's yeah, but that can be used still today in a court of law to reduce sentences and to basically excuse the killing of people. And that is the trans panic defense.
And I should add too that even in, in legislation like in DC, there's still a lot to want to see that even as a discrimination law as well. So if they're going to see it just as a panic, we're further away for even including it, as discrimination laws that are out there, but that doesn't fully protect everyone.
I guess I'm not sure I get it. So are you saying that's okay? We say that's an okay defense?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically that exists.
Exists. Yeah.
How do we go about challenging that kind of a thinking?
Well, I know that, in the House with the Equality Act, there is a clause to speak about this. The problem that I've been told and read is that lawmakers are willing or not willing to actually include it. And because they see that there is a justification for folks to say that it was out of panic, that they had to cause, for them to have a defense to it. And that what's being challenged is what it means to be, discriminatory towards an individual of the LGBTQ community versus what they call like a revealing, like that somehow the justification is that that person should have done it beforehand, or somehow that person should have always notified the person they're with that they have either been trans or non-binary, whatever it may be. And that somehow that, again, that justifies that's discrimination. It's just they were withholding that information, and that person has the right to react. And again, that is coming from, that comes from a place in most, Republican run states that are just continuing to say, how much can I get away from this transphobia, and include it within, the way that laws are interpreted. And so the first step could be is getting the Equality Act passed. That might open actually some room and more discussion to push it further to, as part of discrimination laws. But there's still a hold on that. So, and we'll see, with this new administration and what happens on the Hill in the coming years, that we can actually keep pushing that agenda and include it into discrimination laws. That's basically what it comes down to as well. Yeah.
I have a question. My question is, the equality law, does that not fall under equal protection? Why they have not paid so much attention to it?
Yeah, equal protection. Yeah. So that's kind of the reason why there has been the pushback to fully, from House and into Senate to get that passed, is because that fully protection law is going to be, right now it's being interpreted in so many ways in so many other states that if it was to pass, there was going to be then this kind of upheaval of like states not wanting to adopt the interpretation of it. And so what is happening is now individual states, and on primarily GOP-run states, are trying to redefine it so that they won't have to necessarily give away, that protection to pretty much all LGBTQ people, and trying to keep it only for what they see as, as a way to defining only one section of that population. So I would say a lot of the arguments and the fights right now is basically based on interpretation. And how do you get, lawmakers to expand it out?
That's going to be a problem because you can interpret that any kind of way. Equal protection under the law. So I think that's going to be a big hurdle.
Yeah.
Because you basically already have equal protection, all of us.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
I guess I want to sort of, ask the members of the racial justice ministry and people of color in the room, like building on like this idea of equal protection under the law, like in theory that's what we should all have, but we can see by the disproportionate killing of black people, for example, that is not that's not a truth. I mean, what sort of things are happening kind of in relation to the black community in terms of like building up the sort of legal and policy kind of protections in place that we can learn from and also kind of build into like the transgender protection as well.
Well, one of the things from the legal standpoint, I mean, that's been all of the you know, the civil rights legislation has sort of led the way and been a precedent for the LGBTQ plus and other minorities to follow. And but what they've tried to do with LGBTQ plus is make it an illness. And so to take it out of that category, like we can pray that out of you. Yeah, I mean, we can transform you. And so you have these testimonies of, you know, I once was LGBTQ plus and now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. And that's, but rather than recognizing that this is who I am, I was, you know, from birth. And you have all kinds of episodes that happen where, you know, congressmen, just like they had a cisgender relationship outside of their marriage with a woman, you know, you have it where it was it was a alleged, you know, cisgender male having had a gay boyfriend that, you know, on the side, but he was married too. So you've got all of that kind of stuff going on. And so the I think my point is that they want to make it a disease and an illness and something that can be cured, to take it out of a way of it's a human right. And that's part of that's the fight. So you know, I think, and this is just as we're speaking, just watching those. That's why the Prop 8 and the Marriage Act was so important, because for the first time, you had to recognize that it wasn't illness or sickness. This was a right that they had. So that was a big step. And hopefully with the new administration, some of those you know, those issues will be pushed forward. But you know, we have some challenging times because the federal courts have been packed now with judges that will probably see it the other way, you know, the very conservative, that this isn't, they're not entitled to any legal rights on. And so that's a challenge. So you know, I you know, as a Black person, just from a legal standpoint, I will do more. And I, you know, thank you for bringing up that issue, just in finding out where are the issues being fought in terms of those particular issues. Because just like Roe v. Wade and the women, you know, right to abortion, you know, you find now we're going back fighting for that. So I can see the marriage equality, you know, we have to go back and fight for that all over again. So those are issues.
I'd like to make a comment about that too, because it is such a good question.
Mhm.
And I think history, if we look at it and we see that there really wasn't a change or momentum for civil rights legislation until the Voter Rights Act of 1964, when Black communities could elect their own officials and put people in the legislature in those places that determined and wrote law. There wasn't change before that, right? And I think the pressure that needs to be put on this new administration is there needs to be someone that's trans and from the LGBT community in the administration that can be, and that's just not the Biden administration, but that's also for our states and whatever, that the representation needs to be in the room that is advocating for policy changes. Most of the things we're talking about are changes from within our own community, but this is a crisis that is of massive levels, and that people have been able to get away with in communities such as Texas and Oklahoma, these southern, very conservative places, right? And we haven't talked about religion at all about this in terms of how it's also been complacent in this, but I think we need to put pressure on elected officials to build teams that are reflective of these communities and have people that then can speak from the platform of power about it.
I wanted to just say real quick too, like I feel like that it's a few things. A lot of times people look at the Black community as the model for change and all the amazing change that we've been able to get done. Because I do think that equal protection is it's official on paper, but not in practice. And we see that every day. Like that's why we have Black Lives Matter and all these things are happening now. And that's a big piece of it. It is the getting the elected officials, having representation, getting the vote out. Everyone who talks about how Black women once again saved this country, because of with our vote. But the other piece of that is taking it to the street. That once this, particularly what's been happening lately now with this modern day civil rights movement and so many people in the street and around the world. When I saw London and Berlin and Paris marching for Black Lives Matter, I was like, oh, we've hit something different this time. Maybe this will be, a more of a movement and not a moment. Let's keep this momentum going. So that's a big part of it. And also going back to civil rights, it was when those civil rights activists, Dr. King, people fought against Dr. King, from what I understand, because they didn't want him to have children and women marching. And he said, no, we need to get everyone out there and show that the violence happens not just to Black men, but to women and children as well. And once that was happening and the cameras showed up and people around the world and around the country saw the violence that was happening against Black bodies, that helped to change minds and hearts too, I think. So it's the policy piece, but it's also in representation, but it's putting a face to people, and humanizing folks. Because I think that's the one thing is I run into a lot of people, even with things are happening. I had a Trump friend that's hanging on by a thread right now, but they would say things about COVID. I don't believe COVID is real. And I was like, well, I actually know people who have gotten COVID. I've seen the face of what it looks like with sick people. I don't know any Muslims. Yes, I have really good friends who are Muslims, right? And so it's that proximity piece of knowing people and being proximate that I think helps to change minds too. But that's what the Black community has been really great at, just like public relations and getting out there and making people care about issues.
I've also, kind of off of that, I've also been a big believer of when we're trying to incite change, to do it on a small level, in the home, in the neighborhood. What can you do within that range? Because I believe that there's power in alignment, not so much numbers sometimes, but more just same thinking. And when they mentioned today on this seminar about how, in the San Francisco and Bay Area, they were opening up, if you could open up your home and, house a trans person, that touched me so much, because, I can't imagine what that would mean to somebody, to have shelter and to have love and to open the minds of people, that maybe this was a big step for them, but they are, you can't just turn your head and just, say, well, they don't matter, or whatever it may be. But that's when you really learn, about somebody. You hear their story, and that can be very, that can be one very big step. It's a small step that can lead into a very big step. And, you know, you're having barbecues, and then the neighbors come over, and, you know, and on top of that, I think there's also a bit of a stigma with, you know, just the you know, saying transgender, and, you know, you have this image in your head, and you know, they mentioned it too, like, you know, we're smart, educated people here, and we're not, like, you know, all out at the club dressing crazy and whatnot. So just sort of educating those that are not understanding that people are people. Everybody deserves to be loved. So small steps can lead to big ones.
Yes,
I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, when you're not sure of the pronoun to use, is there a certain protocol to use?
I mean, it kind of depends on context. I mean, like if you're just sort of speaking to someone and unsure, you can just quietly ask them, and like, you don't make a fuss. But or like if it's someone you're seeing and I don't know, you're with someone else who might know, you can ask them. It's you know, it's not rude to ask someone for their pronouns. Just like, I guess mainly just don't treat it as a big deal. Like it's like asking someone their name. Like it's a normal little thing, and then you get an answer, and then you go on, and that's fine. Like, you know, treat it as a part of introduction to someone along those lines, and it's fine.
I was
That
the other day, on Friday, in fact, my granddaughter's school was having, you know, the grandparents and special friends Zoom day. And one of the students, the high school students, was making a presentation just about what the day meant and just statistics and facts and whatnot. And they said, back when I was a boy, and then I was thinking, I said, aren't you still a boy? That's what I was thinking to myself. And then I said, oh, snap. He's they're trans now. And I was like, that was so cool of the school that he can express, they can express who they are, and from a change when they were at the school when they were a boy. And I was just thinking, I'm so glad that my grandchildren are receiving that education. And the children, if we listen to our children, that's why I know we're going to do a separate segment on education. It's so important that our children are exposed to that, where all the instructors, when they send their emails, they put their pronouns. And I need to do that more, I forget, but those are the small steps in recognizing. So other people say, well, why did you do that? That, as Thomas was saying, that brings up that conversation. It makes us more engaged to let them know that we the people refer to ourselves by our pronouns, and it's out of respect. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
There's something just about the normalization of trans people, or just like not like sort of in an assimilation way, but just in the sense that making it so that trans people are no longer sort of, you know, strange alien beings from some other place that no one has ever met, and anything like that. Like there's nothing weird about it. We're just people with a different relationship to gender than most people. But like making that just a sort of an everyday part of life is just a really important part of keeping us safe, really.
I wanted to just, I had to write down a few things, because since I'm becoming well seasoned in age, it seems like I have to write stuff down to keep focused. Okay, so certain things I've just made notations is it says when you have the following factors that influence societal values or mores of one's self-esteem, then there will always be problems with someone who does not, as society says, is normal if they walk, talk, or look like me. So those factors are: one, self-esteem. Some of us, gay, straight, bisexual, already suffer from inferiority complexes who feel they must live up to supposedly values set only by heterosexual standards. Then you have the churches that stress, even with all of their in house morality issues, stress Bible verses or passages about who or what behaviors should not be acceptable in society. Now, Episcopalians, as I can see it, are one of the few religious denominations that try to truly embrace the verse, love thy neighbor as thyself. Once we value and educate people about those who come from different walks of life and that they have contributed greatly to the cultural treasures that we value in our nation's societies and global cultures, if we don't do this, then the discriminating practices and phobias will only continue. So that's my handle on it.
Thank you so much for that. Just being aware of the time, I just want to make sure that those people who haven't necessarily had a lot to say in this conversation have a chance to weigh in. I don't know if Suzanne, you had any thoughts you wanted to share, or Tony or Naomi, if you wanted to add anything. You don't have to, just feel free to jump in. Or any final thoughts from anyone else?
Well, I've been very moved by the conversation about working up close, sharing with your friends and neighbors and the people you know. If you know somebody, that proximity thing. My daughter works at John Muir High School, where I worked for 30 years. And one of her students was a transgender. And within the 4 years that she was there, when she was in her senior year, the school elected her homecoming queen. And I thought, that just seems almost impossible to me from when I, was teaching there. So, I mean, it's a huge change going on in some places in smaller communities, I think.
I'd like to talk about, though we don't have time right now to really discuss it, but I'd like to talk about what our church is going to do. I think it's important for us, as the speakers said in the film, to support trans people, and housing seems to be really number one, housing and jobs. And there are organizations out there that are doing work. The LA Gay and Lesbian Center has a big and growing trans, I forget what it's called now, network, let's call it, with a lot of different programs. And they have had housing they've done for gay and lesbian elderly people. I don't know if they have housing for trans people. But that idea of San Francisco getting a big grant to help people house trans people, that's beyond my scope of doing. But I'm wondering if the church, if we as a group can try to encourage our church to either put some of this as an action item, or I forget what we call it each week when we choose, well, it's usually a ministry or a group to support financially, like Learning Works, we send money to them, or Black Lives Matter, we raise money for them. Is there a way for us to have our church do such a thing, to direct some money to places that are already supporting trans people out in the Los Angeles County community? That's it.
It's a good idea. I wanted to say just two things. One is, I think just remembering to treat people like you would want to be treated, or actually better than you'd want to be treated. And I know that this is a difficult landscape for a lot of people, particularly getting older, of how do you navigate pronouns and all of this. I think the one thing to remember is just to treat people like people and respect them, and not do the whole, this is my trans friend. Like I've had people do all the time, this is my Black friend Monique. Oh, the Black people are here, and make it this weird thing. And even at All Saints, there's just been some weird experiences around identity. And so just being really mindful of that, and just be warm, be loving, be opening, but not putting someone, like putting the spotlight on them in that way about their identity, because that's really uncomfortable. The other thing is, I feel like, so me, Thomas, and Hannah are all on vestry. And I want to just say, as your junior warden for the next few months, if there's anything that I can do to support the LGBTQ ministry, or getting more, like whether it's having speakers come to the forum, or ways that we can support, or if there are organizations or things like you all, like Mary was saying, that we can support, let me know what we can do. Because as you know, we're going through a budget crisis. We don't have a lot of resources right now, but we definitely partner. We're working with LA Voice right now to do a lot more of like partnering with outside organizations. And so there might be things that even LA Voice is doing with the LGBTQ and specifically trans communities that we can partner on. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Monique. Absolutely for that. Yeah. And quickly, as we come to an end, one of the things that both Hannah and myself have been working on, and outside of the need to support the community, is bringing in the voices within the wider church. And luckily, during this time when we can do that digitally, it's been nice that we've been able to draw in different folks who are in the ministry, and give them the voice, and also so that the rest can also then hear that voice as well. So we're going to be recording one this coming week, and posting it on the church website, and working on ways to make that more accessible. But yeah, definitely, one of the things that both I and myself have been working on is how we can expand the ministry, just not to remain at All Saints, but to really make this an outward outreach, so that we can, bring in folks who are just, not knowing where to go, but want a place, and they can come into this, sacred ground, and feel supported. So, yeah, always, we appreciate the support that we get, and because it is intense work to get that sometimes up and going, but yeah, thank you for that. Well, I know that we had set this program to end at 4, so I think that that's where we're at. I've been I'm responsible for a closing prayer, but before I give that, I just want to thank the Racial Justice Ministry for inviting the LGBTQ ministry. This has been a wonderful program. I'm even more excited that we know we can get this recording up on the website and different outlets, and I know that folks will watch, and this is an important thing to watch during this time. So I'm very, very thrilled that we were able to do this, and hope we can do this again. This is lovely, and I would love to do this again with all of you doing that. So I will close this with a prayer. It's a collect prayer that we actually read on Friday at the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And if you have not viewed the service, it is online. And so it's a prayer that we ended the service with this prayer. So I will end this program with the same thing. So God dwells in you.
And also in you.
God of all mercy and consolation, Come to the aid of your peoples as we mourn the loss of the dead on this Transgender Day of Remembrance. Turn us from our pity, despair, and fear towards full relationship with you and all of our neighbors. Give us the courage to challenge oppression, both gender-based or based on our other ways of dividing and conquering. Love us into including all of our neighbors. Give us the light to examine ourselves, our comfort, privilege, and fear, and churn us towards relationship. May your Holy Spirit lead us to open our hearts to you and one another in confession, and be open to your forgiveness and renewal. Amen.
Amen.